2/3 of your stomach is now gone.
Yes.
Toxic chemicals, including cyanide, poisoned workers at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard.
The things that we did were horrible.
The King 5 investigators exposed the health threats and asked tough questions.
As a supervisor, I continued to do things that I look back at and it just gives me nightmares.
There's been threats to kill, strangulation, rape, stalking.
But state law is not stopping domestic abuse suspects from having guns.
He just doesn't want to exist anymore because he's in so much pain.
In so much pain after working at the Hanford nuclear reservation, now he's being denied the help he desperately needs.
It's not just a cover-up, it's criminal.
It's a mockery of treatment.
A state agency stopped her from investigating an alcohol treatment clinic. The King 5 investigators find out why.
It's very easy to think that certain things are totally acceptable and affordable when it's not your money.
You'll be shocked by the pay raises for some state ferry workers.
Are you sure that what happened between these lines on the football field is what's caused your injuries?
Absolutely. Football is a violent game.
Life after the game. Former Seahawks share the painful truth about their careers on the gridiron. This is the King 5 Investigators Primetime Special. Here are your hosts, Susannah and Chris Ingalls.
Thanks for joining us. In 2017, the King 5 investigators filed dozens of reports, stories that exposed fraud and shined a spotlight on injustices.
Over the next hour, you'll see the top stories produced by our unit, the culmination of months of work, information pulled from thousands of documents, and powerful interviews. We strive to serve the public interest and give victims a voice.
We begin tonight with our series that exposed how the federal government systematically turned its back on sick Hanford workers. This story exposed a deliberate cover-up that kept dozens of workers unable to get the help they needed. Here's that report from Sick and Forgotten at Hanford. You're watching some of the most dangerous work tackled at Hanford, decontaminating underground vaults covered with the byproducts of radioactive nuclear waste.
It's, like America's Chernobyl.
The man on the back is Dave Ardall, a former Marine and competitive athlete. Ardall was on the front lines of work like this at the site for a decade. That was 9 years ago. Today, this 45-year-old is sick and dying from an incurable lung disease.
They have stripped away every bit of quality of life from not just him, but from all of us.
Instead of working and playing with his 3 young children,
take a breath, let the air out.
Ardall spends his days at doctor's appointments.
Good.
He's in kidney failure, has excruciating nerve damage, chronic fatigue, and diabetes.
Pain medicine here, for my pain.
And do you take these as well?
I take those as well.
It takes dozens of pills a day to keep him going.
Going through this every day and having my kids see dad like this. It never used to be like that. It's tough. Really tough.
For 45 years, Hanford was one of the most important factories for the country's nuclear weapons program. Everyone knew radiation was a killer, but there was another hazard workers didn't know about, a toxic metal called beryllium. Beryllium dust traveled all over to places like those vaults where Dave Ardall worked.
I can't think of a metal that's more toxic than beryllium.
Dr. Lee Newman of the University of Colorado is the world's leading expert on beryllium.
It sounds like you're saying in some cases beryllium can be even more dangerous than a radionuclide.
In some cases, yes.
I couldn't believe, that this was me. This inside my lungs, they're all inflamed and red.
In 2008, Ardall got sick with all the signs of the life-threatening illness, chronic beryllium disease, or CBD.
Hard to believe.
Very hard to believe.
His wife, Christine, watched her husband's body and mental state fall apart.
He just doesn't want to exist anymore because he's in so much pain. He doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to live the rest of his life in total pain.
Hanford is one of the only places beryllium dust exists in the state of Washington, so it seemed easy to connect the dots. Working around beryllium gave Ardal the rare condition of chronic beryllium disease.
You see that big mass right there?
Several doctors diagnosed him with it, but when he applied for workers' compensation, this is what he heard back. We're asking the state to reject your claim. Your condition is not the result of the exposure alleged. This is not an occupational disease. We found you didn't work around beryllium. Your claim is being denied.
As soon as I got sick, they flushed me down the toilet like I was used toilet paper.
This is the company behind those rejections, Penzer North America in Richland. They manage worker comp claims on behalf of Hanford's owner, the U.S. Department of Energy.
If you work in a beryllium area,
boxes of documents show the way the system rolls. If you submit a claim for CBD, Penzer and the feds typically wage an expensive, cutthroat legal battle. That doesn't seem right. Hanford is an infamous worksite for having significant beryllium contamination.
And it shows a perfect example of how they treat the workers and their families like dirt and could care less. Absolutely.
Records show that for years, the federal government knowingly risked the lives of workers by allowing them to be overexposed to beryllium. A declassified report by a Hanford expert in 1953 detailed that even when exposures have been low, it's led to acute poisoning and fatalities. But the government sat on that for decades.
So they lied to the workers.
They lied to the workers.
State Representative Jerry Paulette is a Hanford and beryllium expert.
The one word I will use is criminal. It's not just a cover-up, it's criminal.
In the year 2000, the Department of Energy finally came clean about beryllium. But at Hanford, they didn't buy in. They dragged their feet on protecting workers from the metal for 10 more years. A 10-year window when people like Dave Ardal were sent directly into harm's way and came down with CBD.
This was like a death sentence to anyone who already had beryllium exposure and sensitization.
we were all deceived, and it was production over safety.
Production over safety.
Yeah.
The Ardal's case even went to court, where a troubling fact came to light. Under oath, Hanford's top doctor, Karen Phillips, testified a Department of Energy official pressured her to go against workers like Dave Ardal. The doctor said Julie Yamauchi directed her to stop diagnosing people with chronic beryllium disease.
She should be fired from her job. Who is she to tell a medical doctor that she can't diagnose or treat or anything of that sort? That's not in her job description. She's not a medical doctor.
We asked the Department of Energy for an interview with Julie Yamauchi. When they turned us down, her boss said he wasn't aware of those allegations.
If you were to hear that that was happening, that this advocate, your employee, was pressuring and telling a medical professional what to do, what would you think of that?
Well, I don't know that we are qualified to make those decisions. That's why we have a site medical director.
Hi, honey. How's your day? You got all your fancy colors here, huh?
The Ardals are trying to soldier ahead the best they can. But last Christmas, they got more news about Dave's health.
I got lung cancer now and colon cancer.
The family isn't giving up. They won't stop looking for justice until they see a change in the system and someone held accountable.
They gave them a death penalty. They're all dying slowly and miserably. And it doesn't affect them. They carry on, they make money, they live in their fancy houses, they do whatever, they go on their vacations. It doesn't affect them. But who holds them accountable? When does this end?
After a 4-year battle, Dave Ardal prevailed. He won his court case, but Penzer didn't give up. They sent him to another doctor who said, yes, you have chronic beryllium disease, but you're well enough to work. Your claim for disability is denied. Since our series first aired, Penzer was fired. The Department of Energy has overhauled its worker comp program, and workers are having an easier time getting their claims accepted.
In Washington state, nearly 400 domestic violence victims have been shot to death by their abusers in the last decade. Victims are in much greater danger when their attacker has access to a gun. The King 5 investigators exposed how a law that's supposed to take firearms out of their hands is failing, and abusers often never surrender their guns. Here's our follow-up story about the new task force that's trying to turn that around.
All rise. Superior Court is now in session. The Honorable Jean Mitchell presiding.
There's an allegation that you had a weapon in your waistband. There's an allegation that you possessed a gun last year.
The petitioner indicated that he twice threatened to kill her with a gun, pointed it at her, and cocked it in front of her children.
What's happening in this King County courtroom is leading to more of these ending up in the police property room. These firearms belong to accused domestic abusers, many of whom tried to hide them from authorities.
So all these guns were recovered either from a search warrant or by people that served the protection orders.
Sergeant Dorothy Kim of the Seattle Police Department's Domestic Violence Unit is part of a new task force hunting for guns that would have previously gone undetected. What's the likelihood that any of these guns would have ended up in police hands?
None. None. A year ago, none of these guns would have been recovered. We would never have done the search warrant.
This is just about whether you have the guns. That's the only thing this is about.
God is my witness, I don't have it, ma'am.
Okay.
Firearms hearings, like this one, specifically target people who are served with protection orders. The court has ordered them to cease all contact with someone, typically a family member or boyfriend or girlfriend, who filed for the court's protection.
I've tried everything to prove that I don't have any firearms.
The judge must ensure that people served with protection orders are following the part of the law that requires them to turn their guns over to police. That law exists because of the increased danger that domestic violence victims face if their abuser has access to a gun. They're 5 times more likely to be murdered.
Then all of a sudden, I get this phone call. He shot her.
That terrible call to Kathy Gock last year is an example. Her 33-year-old daughter Tabitha was shot in Federal Way, allegedly by her abusive ex-boyfriend.
Apparently, the gun was in a closet, up in his closet in a shoebox.
Experts say getting guns out of an abuser's hands early is key because victims are in the greatest danger right when they leave them. Tabitha's ex, Rashid Mitchell, is accused of murdering her 12 days after she received a protection order against him. How important is it to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers?
Oh, Tabitha would be alive today. That should be proof right there. Tabitha would have been alive today.
Yet a King 5 investigation in May found the courtroom for firearms hearings nearly empty day after day, even though the calendar posted in the hallway showed dozens of accused abusers scheduled to appear. Our review of court records showed that nearly half of those people simply did not respond to the court's weapons surrender order. The law barring them from possessing guns was being ignored.
And if we do have contact with the victim to get more specific information about when she last saw the firearms.
Chris Anderson, who runs the domestic violence unit in the Seattle City Attorney's Office, has long been concerned about lax enforcement of weapons surrender orders. After our stories this summer, he helped convince King County Executive Dow Constantine and Seattle City Council to pledge $1 million to create the task force that is now piling up guns from weapons surrender orders.
She indicated in the petition that he has a handgun that he keeps in a specific place in the house.
The police and prosecutors on the Regional Firearms Task Force interview victims and witnesses and even obtain search warrants if needed to get an abuser's guns.
He had threatened her with a gun. The firearms are usually loaded. There's been threats to kill, strangulation, rape, stalking.
Instead of relying on the word of accused abusers, the court now hears evidence collected by the task force.
We also have information that there are 7 to 8 other guns at the property where he resides.
Our mission is to ensure that defendants who are subject to protection orders are turning in their firearms and reducing risk to victims.
The result, the rate of guns turned over or seized by police has more than quadrupled since the task force started enforcing the surrender law.
Do you have a gun? Oh, no, I don't have a gun. I mean, who's going to say, oh, yeah, I have a gun, I'll give it to you? But they need to go further. They need to investigate it. They need to find out from the victim if there's a gun.
Task force members say that King County is one of the few places, possibly in the nation, that is aggressively going after abusers' guns. And Susannah, that's the really scary thing here, that even with all we know about domestic abuse and guns, there's few places that are actually enforcing this law.
Well, it's obvious it's very dangerous, so why aren't they going after these guys?
Well, people have told me that one problem is that police departments are worried about going into a domestic abuse situation. That's one of the most dangerous things they do. So you have to get police officers on board, and they want to respond to these very volatile situations in the right way, and that takes time to get them on board.
It was very personal to me. And I saw your story on that, and I cried.
Sobriety for sale. Up next, I'll introduce you to former state workers turned whistleblowers. It's the investigation involving court-ordered drug treatment, forged signatures, and a state agency falling down on the job.
Plus, Hanford workers dumping radioactive materials straight into the ground.
This is surprising every single time I see it that we don't seem to learn very well.
I'll show you the evidence and see what happens when I confront an executive to get answers.
And the real deal about former Seahawks and football injuries.
There's something hurting on me 24 hours a day, every day of my life.
The survey sent to retired Seahawks players and their honest responses. In May, Washington Governor Jay Inslee signed a law based on our sobriety for sale investigation. It targets the DSHS agency that inspects the 570 licensed drug treatment clinics in our state. The problems with that Department of Social and Health Services agency are so serious that whistleblowers agreed to air their concerns in front of our cameras. As deaths from DUIs, prescription drugs, and heroin were rising 6 years ago, Washington State's licensed drug and alcohol treatment clinics were more vital than ever. In 2011, a chain of treatment centers in Pierce County caught the interest of a state inspector.
I needed to kind of gather myself because I was absolutely shocked.
Tammy Wright was a state certification specialist, inspecting patient files at Abracadabra, a treatment clinic where Pierce County courts send defendants for drug and alcohol services. Wright noticed this: signatures on treatment records bearing the name of drug counselor Kathy Dastrup. The signatures looked very different from those on other Dastrup records.
What I found in those records was that Andrew Farmer was forging Kathy Dastrup's signature on documents that were going to the court.
She discovered that Dastrup was allowing a counselor trainee, Andrew Farmer, to forge compliance reports, the official document that tells the court that a defendant is attending treatment. It raised serious questions about whether defendants were in counseling at all. Wright confronted Andrew Farmer.
When I pointed that out to him, he started crying. So he didn't deny it. He started crying.
Abracadabra, Doorway to Recovery, and a Renton satellite clinic are all owned by John Dorman.
Well, we'd like to talk to you about your business.
What about it?
Who denied any wrongdoing in a previous King 5 interview, including accusations that his counselors were accepting bribes from clients.
I think we run a legal business and we do a good job. We provide really good treatment.
Dorman's attorneys complained to Wright's superiors in 2011. As she was planning to dig deeper at his other clinics, the unexpected happened.
But then all of a sudden I get notification that I'm not allowed to review any of John Dorman's agencies. I was stunned.
Wright worked for 10 years at the DSHS department known as the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery, DBHR, until she quit a few months ago. The small agency has the job of inspecting 570 treatment clinics across Washington. There are only 5 certification specialists, and Tammy Wright is not the only one that DBHR yanked from a serious investigation.
I felt betrayed, kind of. Professionally betrayed.
It happened to Mary Testa Smith, a certification specialist for 20 years until retiring this year. In 2016, she and her supervisor tried to revoke the license of this Spokane clinic, which had a long history of violations. They discovered while inspecting files that this repeat DUI offender failed 6 drug tests at the clinic that they say were not reported to the court.
They're looking for me to rat them off for something that they did wrong, and I'm not aware of it.
There was nothing in that file that indicated that he was actually in recovery.
When the clinic's attorneys complained, DBHR administrators reached a settlement that permitted the Trouble Treatment Center to keep its license and the DUI offender to keep driving in spite of all those failed drug tests. And DBHR barred both Testa Smith and her supervisor from inspecting the clinic ever again.
When attorneys start objecting and questioning, it seems like DBHR just kind of gives up. It's a mockery of treatment.
With deadly consequences. Michael Robertson was a patient at a Tacoma clinic exposed last year in our sobriety for sale investigations. While he was supposedly in treatment, Robertson drunkenly drove the wrong way on the 520 bridge and hit and killed an innocent driver. Robertson's counselor at the time was Kathy Dastrup. Would it have been different if DBR had acted on Tammy Wright's forgery investigation 2 years before the crash that killed Morgan Fick Williams?
It was very personal to me. And I saw your story on that, and I cried. What happened to her was so wrong, and you can never make it right.
Once they go around us and get up to the higher levels.
Both former employees say the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery, the watchdog over the state's treatment industry, lost its bite under the leadership of one man. Why was that investigator taken off the case?
I've made those decisions more than once over the last 10 to 15 years. And there's nothing real mysterious about this.
Dennis Malmer, DBHR's deputy director, spoke with us last year. He said reluctant witnesses and a lack of evidence have hindered cases, not threats from treatment center lawyers.
Whether an agency seeks legal counsel or not is really not relevant to me.
My heart's out of it. It's just been cut by some of the decisions that have been made. And so I went at the end of March. I just couldn't stay there any longer.
When we're not holding agencies accountable to providing services, none of us are really safe out on the roads.
After that story aired, DSHS's Assistant Secretary Carla Reyes says she's launching an investigation to determine if DBHR is following the proper procedures. So far, none of the whistleblowers we've talked to have been interviewed for that investigation.
In 2017, the King 5 investigators entered our 4th year of uncovering mismanagement, deceit, and violations of state and federal laws at the Hanford nuclear site in eastern Washington, including in August, a stunning disregard for the environment and the laws meant to protect it. We obtained video evidence showing workers dumping radioactive liquids out of big metal containers on purpose straight into the ground, something that's been illegal at the site for nearly 25 years. There were at least 3 such incidents in August. We showed the video to Representative Jerry Pollitt, who pushed for the law that made this activity illegal.
It's a crime. I am convinced from looking at this that you're witnessing a criminal violation of several statutes, not just one. I am shocked to see something like this in 2017.
Our investigation found the contractor caught dumping the water, Washington River Protection Solutions, or WRPS, had a motive for skirting the law. They were in a hurry to use the metal containers to finish a job that would earn them a bonus of $1 million. I met up with one of the company's top executives in their parking lot. Hey, Mr. Cantwell, I'm Susannah Frame from King TV.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. We're here to talk to you about the water events, the dumping events that occurred in August. Many of your employees are concerned about it because they didn't think it should happen. They knew it wasn't right, and they knew it wasn't being reported. What do you have to say to that?
I don't have anything to say to that. We didn't do anything that was inappropriate.
WRPS didn't report the dumping to state regulators like they were supposed to until the King 5 investigators started asking questions. That prompted the State Department of Ecology to launch an investigation. And we found that the state AG's Environmental Crimes Unit is interested in the case as well. And we're waiting for those results, Chris.
I can see why they would be interested. So you put a lot of work on Hanford. Let's stay on it for just a moment. You found several violations related to a tunnel collapse, correct?
Yeah, that was a different case, and that was a big national story. In May, workers discovered a huge hole that exposed highly radioactive rail cars that had been buried there decades ago. The collapse put workers and the public at risk. A big wind could have spread extremely hot radioactive particles across the state. We investigated and found this potential disaster should have been prevented. Hanford officials had been warned of a collapse risk for nearly, get this, 4 decades, but they didn't take the warning seriously. Veteran worker Steve Ellingson is one of the workers who had to take cover during that collapse emergency.
When it's something difficult like this, I don't think they care enough about the people or the environment because of the time and money that would have to be spent to fix it.
Down to money.
Yeah, I think everything out there is down to money.
In November, workers finished filling that hole with grout as a fix, but experts say a permanent solution is still needed to prevent another collapse.
I believe my memory loss is a direct result of some traumatic trauma that I suffered playing football.
Just ahead, the investigators sent a survey to hundreds of former Seahawks players about their health after football. Is this game even more harmful than you think? Men living in pain and worried about brain damage. That's the feedback we got from surveys we mailed to hundreds of former Seattle Seahawks football players. Our year-long project reveals the lasting damage to body and mind caused by professional football. Are you sure that what happened between these lines on the football field is what's caused your injuries?
Absolutely. Football is a violent game. And if you're going to be good at it, you have to be violent.
There's something hurting on me 24 hours a day, every day of my life. I already know how I'm going to die, and it's going to have to do with football. It's going to be from the injuries I suffered from football.
We mailed our survey to more than 800 former Seahawks. This table is full of the 108 responses that we got. Those players could mail back the survey confidentially, which most of them did. Some of them agreed to be interviewed for our story. So let's get to the survey. And the first question, how would you compare your overall health now to men who did not play in the NFL? Same, better, worse? Okay, so more than half think they're in worse shape than the average guy. Next question. What types of injuries did you suffer in the NFL?
This was a hand that had to stop him. And so this wrist got twisted every which way.
I had so many injuries in terms of neck contusions, shoulder, knees.
Oh, there's no question. My knees and stuff, man. I'm walking around like cracked eggshells.
Question. Do you suffer from football-related pain today?
I have terrible arthritis in my hands. I can't bend my fingers anymore. You know, you deal with those things and you take care of them to the best of your ability and you just keep moving.
My name is Greg Gaines. I played for the Seahawks from 1981 to 1988. During that time, I had a lot of injuries, surgery every offseason. It continued throughout my adult life, and it still continues. So to this day, I've had 35 orthopedic surgeries.
How you feeling right now?
Very stiff and sore. I can't wait to get back to my hotel room, to be honest with you. All right.
I'm of the concern now of a sport I love being thrown under the bus a little bit too much, maybe.
You don't seem like a guy that has any regrets about playing this game.
The scars, if you will, are something of a badge of honor.
Okay, this next one is a big question. Was your brain injured playing football? No, not sure, yes. Was your brain injured playing professional football?
I believe it was. I believe my memory loss is a direct result of some traumatic trauma that I suffered playing football.
I would say yes, my brain has been injured. Yeah, for sure.
I knew that something was not right. Everything was cloudy. Nothing was clear. It could be really scary. Just not normal.
Do you think you have CTE?
I do.
He was the center, and he also was the deep snapper. Grant's neck was jammed in his head every single play of the game. The saddest part of it all for me is that I didn't know until after Grant died that he was brain damaged. Grant's brain went to the Boston University, and after Dr. Ann McKee, who is the leading pathologist there, did the report, it came back as stage 3 CTE. So there's 4 stages, and Grant had stage 3. She said that if he'd lived for 1 more year, he would have been mindless. It all started making sense to me that Grant had been losing his mind our entire marriage from the time that he quit playing football.
Tests so far, or the studies so far, are probably studies that have significant bias in them. With the NFL players, if they sign up for the concussion reimbursement, then they have a chance to get some more money. If you have a chance to get money, maybe your symptoms are worse than what they really are.
I know people will say, I can't believe the guy says he'd do it all over again.
But I would. You know, football is what I did, it's what I love. I do it all over again.
But it hurts you, seriously.
Well, that's okay. When you do something that you love, a lot of people can't say that they get to do that. I can. I got to live my dream, and I'm good with that. It's a great game.
In answer to another survey question, about 2/3 of players don't think fans or the NFL care if players are hurt by the game.
Well, I'm a fan, and I care.
Okay.
And one thing I have heard about, and everyone has, is there's better equipment out there now, right? And a lot more protocols. So hopefully aren't they safer?
Well, some players definitely feel the NFL has progressed on that issue, but many said that they think that today's players are bigger, stronger, faster, the hits are harder, and equipment can't really protect today's players.
This information comes to us at a time when we are told every year that we are facing a transportation funding crisis.
I first exposed financial waste in the ferry system several years ago, and leaders promised to fix the problem. But wait until you see what happened to that so-called fix and what that cost taxpayers. We'll be right back. This year, we continued our series, Waste on the Water, about wasted taxpayer dollars within the Washington State ferry system. This time we found after top managers promised to save money, they instead found other ways to pad paychecks and ended up spending a lot more. In 2010, the high-profile state ferry system suffered a public bruising. The Washington State ferry system is cutting out some fat when Waste on the Water revealed a systemic gaming of the system to pad up paychecks. After that, top transportation leaders promised the public a redo, a new, transparent, more efficient way of doing business.
By God, the ferry system needs help. It can't operate on the funding it has. We must all do everything we can, and yes, that means employees giving up on some of the benefits and compensation they've had.
Boy, that sounded good in 2010, but it's not what happened. Through analyzing 5 years worth of ferry financial data, we found employees didn't give up any of their benefits or compensation after all. After saving about $2 million in labor costs, the employee extras were quietly tacked right back on. That sent expenses soaring from paying workers $95 million in 2012 to $113 million in 2015.
They kept that in the dark.
Maria Frost is the director of transportation at the conservative think tank, the Washington Policy Center.
This information comes to us at a time when we are told every year that we are facing a transportation funding crisis.
How did the money hike back up and beyond when they were supposed to be cutting back? After all, the state did take away perks like paying double time for working overtime. The legislature lowered that to time and a half, just like other state employees. We found behind closed doors in contract negotiations, ferry workers got that money right back with something new, callback pay. Callback pay had a different name with the same result, double time. That's cost taxpayers over $3 million in the last 5 years.
When you have a public agency saying they're going to reform the agency and save money, and then they find ways to pay themselves back, essentially, that is dishonest, and it makes it very difficult for the public to trust officials.
Well, I just told them that basically this is just hiding the ball from the public, and essentially this is going to end up costing us more, which it did.
Steve Rogers is the former director of operations for state ferries. He negotiated contracts on behalf of the ferry system for 10 years. But leading the negotiations, representatives from the governor's office. Rogers says they seemed very interested in keeping the ferry unions happy, unions that back Democratic governors like Jay Inslee. I asked Rogers if the governor's negotiators seem to be working in the best interest of the citizens of the state.
No, I do not believe so at all.
In 2014, WashDOT ushered in new ferry management. Top boss Lynn Griffith declared a new day on the water.
A lot has changed. A significant amount has changed. We have new leadership in place. We are managing the overtime.
Here's how she managed overtime on her watch, by watching it explode. In 2014, the overtime bill was $6.6 million. The year after that, more than $8 million.
It is totally acceptable for people to work hard and to be compensated for their hard work. The issue here is how that compensation was acquired. That's the issue.
We found some relief workers working the system. Perhaps the most controversial past practice involved travel time pay. We found some people doubling their salaries by getting paid to drive to and from work.
With the 25%, the 28%,
When we interviewed Griffith in November, she said that was a thing of the past, saving millions of dollars. And off camera, you can hear some of her top managers touting the success of eliminating travel time.
Right. Wasn't that an effort, though, to save some money, and it did do that?
It did save money.
$10 million.
Yeah.
$10 million. That's right. 10 million tax dollars saved. But we found that's not true. When they got rid of travel time pay, ferries made up for it by adding a replacement called assignment pay. So while travel time went down, assignment pay went up. So far, that tab's at more than $7 million and counting.
The result was that we basically just put some sand over it, so it looks different.
One more thing. Last year I asked state ferries if it was financially prudent to be asking taxpayers for even more extras like big pay raises. Lynn Griffith seemed insulted.
And is this responsible management when we have a ferry
Yes.
system that's always crying broke?
Well, since I've been here, we're not crying broke. I don't know where that comes from.
She must have been hoping we wouldn't get her hands on this piece of paper. Just last year, the ferry system wrote there was a budget shortfall. They were broke, saying this is a serious situation, and asked the legislature for an additional $6.6 million just to continue operating through 2017.
It's very easy to think that certain things are totally acceptable and affordable when it's not your money.
After that story first aired, members of the Senate Labor Committee held a public hearing on the issues we raised, and they plan to introduce legislation in the upcoming session to take the secrecy out of labor negotiations.
Here are some sobering facts for the holidays. We found that DUI deaths in Washington reached a 6-year high, but at the same time, arrests of DUI suspects in our state dropped dramatically. Law officers told us they think there are just as many drunk drivers as ever out there on the roads. So why are they catching fewer of them? The State Patrol told us that new legal requirements make the booking process take much longer, so a trooper can't make as many arrests during a shift. Also, the increasing use of marijuana, which is harder to detect, takes additional time in the field. And the State Patrol has a serious hiring shortage, fewer troopers on the road. Sammy Frick Martin's father was killed by a drunk driver in 2015 when DUIs reached a 6-year high. She says it's shameful that Washington's been unable to reverse the deadly trend.
Imagine if it was your own family. I mean, you can't even fathom what it would feel like to get that knock on the door. It ruins your whole world.
In May, the State Patrol showed us new technology it will be using to speed up DUI processing in the field, and a record number of rookies graduated from the academy this year, adding much needed manpower to the force.
I've been to the bottom, you know. I felt like I wasn't going to live.
Workers told to perform dangerous tasks at the Bremerton Naval Shipyard without the proper safety systems in place. While managers ignored the warnings, the workers paid a price. This year we launched a new investigation called 7 Years of Cyanide. We found that for years, a group of workers at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton were poisoned by toxins such as cyanide. And during that time, managers wrongly insisted they were safe. Along the way, they violated multiple state and federal safety laws. The Puget Sound Naval Shipyard is Bremerton's largest employer, a National Historic Landmark, and a Superfund site. Workers here overhaul ships and tear apart nuclear submarines, and along the way generate harmful toxins like mercury, PCBs, and cyanide.
Cyanide gases and chromium gases and fumes.
In 28 years in the job, Tim Combs knows all about exposure to those toxins, and he's suffering because of it.
And now your life is totally different?
Oh yeah, it's upside down.
Combs worked inside a new hazardous water treatment plant opened in 2006. It was plagued with problems from the beginning. And the King 5 investigators have found managers made things worse by violating safety laws meant to protect their employees. Take cyanide alarms installed in the plant. They didn't work, and that's against the law. They routinely went off at odd times. Firefighters responded so often, managers had a new idea. During certain processes, just turn the cyanide alarms off altogether.
That was part of our job. We were told to turn the alarm off.
I have terminated people for that.
Dirk Dunning of Salem, Oregon, is an industrial engineering expert with 40 years of experience.
Turning them off endangers life safety. And that's just an absolute. You don't do that.
2/3 of your stomach is now gone.
Yes.
In the last 2 years, Tim Combs has undergone 3 major surgeries for gastric ulcer disease. He lost 100 pounds in a matter of months, had 65% of his stomach removed, and at one point wasn't expected to survive.
I've been to the bottom, you know. I felt like I wasn't going to live, you know. Talking to him.
His doctors believe exposure to poisons in the plant caused his problems, and this didn't help. For several years, workers weren't issued respirators. In 2013, OSHA came in to investigate and cited that as a serious violation of federal regs.
And was told that, we don't need a respirator.
5 current and former shipyard workers tell King 5 supervisors frowned on wearing respirators. It would look bad to other employees walking by.
Why I agreed to do that, I question why I did that to this day.
Kevin Albert has a debilitating respiratory disease after working at the plant. He too says bosses discouraged respirators.
They said that they did not want that perception of us doing things that were dangerous that close to their areas.
They said that out loud.
Yes.
The Navy denied interview requests, but told us the facility is and always has been safe, that there are no work environments at the shipyard that require the use of full respirators. They also said, we believe no member of our team has been exposed to chemicals above legal limits. Try telling that to Tim Combs. We've obtained air monitoring records showing he was routinely exposed to chlorine gas above legal limits. One sample showed chlorine at double the amount considered immediately harmful or fatal.
It's serious. Like, this is real.
Tim's son, Josh, has been helping to take care of his dad since the age of 15.
I just want to say to them, like, I hope you realize that, like, you're dealing with, like, people's lives. This isn't a chess game, you know?
But there was times he would lay in bed with me and say, you need anything, Dad? And, yeah, sucks a lot. That's daily, 1, 2, about 5 or 6 a day.
Tim Combs' life revolves around medications and doctor's appointments. What he says could have been prevented if, inside the plant, the shipyard had installed working ventilation systems to draw gases out of his breathing space. They didn't, also against the law. And with so many broken systems, it was commonplace to use dangerous workarounds, like this one. 4 separate workers tell us they'd routinely stand over a tank full of a known carcinogen and drop in bags of a powdery toxic chemical by hand. What was their protection? Not a respirator, but holding their breath.
And the fumes and the crap would be so thick and heavy where you would almost be gagging. So the trick was to go up there and hold your breath for, okay, now.
In hindsight, the things that we did were horrible. And as a supervisor, I continued to do things that I look back at and it gives me nightmares.
The toxin dumped by hand, sodium bisulfite. The chemical producer warns in high concentrations should be used with an approved respirator. It can cause central nervous system problems, death, or gastrointestinal issues. Exactly what Tim Combs lives with every day. The most painful part of the disease to this single dad, all the days he's lost with his kids.
Can't put that in words. No. It's big, very big. You can only be a dad once.
The shipyard finally shut down the treatment plant in 2013, 7 years after it opened. Then they put $2 million worth of upgrades into it, and they are now running at full capacity again. But as you can see, for some people, it was just too late.
You know, Susannah, it comes to mind that there are people out there who are responsible for this. Are they going to be held accountable?
Well, we're hoping, and we're waiting to see what will happen. We can tell you that I've been in contact with Senator Patty Murray's office. They say they're well aware of our investigation, and I'm waiting to hear back whether they will be asking their own questions or maybe launching their own investigation to get to the bottom of just that.
And then you watch the stories, and some people there are terribly sick. What do they want as a remedy for all this?
They'd like to see accountability, but for their own personal lives and for their families, they want help. They've been kind of kicked to the curb. Many of them, like Tim Combs, he hasn't had any of his medical bills paid, and so they just want to be made whole, get their salaries that are due to them, and their medical bills paid, and try to move forward with their lives.
You bet. And I know you're talking to lots of people, so there's more in the pipeline on this. Well, listen, everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to watch King 5 News in the coming weeks as we bring you new investigations and updates in 2018. You can also see our reports online at king5.com.
And we'll continue to hold agencies accountable, uncover government waste, and expose fraud wherever and whenever it happens. Many of the stories you saw tonight began with a tip, and we'd love to hear yours. You can call us with your tip at 888-K5-STORY or send us an email to investigators@king5.com. Again, thanks for watching tonight. That'll do it for us in 2017. In the year ahead, we'll be sure to work in the public interest in the King 5 Investigative Unit.
So long, everybody.